Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Coaching Conversation. In this series, we're aiming to help business owners, business leaders, and fellow coaches by sharing our experience and the experience of our guests who've coached people all around the world in all of different sectors and industries that you can imagine. So, very little more to say other than do please now sit back, relax, and enjoy this edition, and look out for a special offer for our loyal audience at the end of the programme. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Coaching Conversation. Today, I'm joined by John Gates, all the way from Medford, Oregon, who is a salary coach. Who'd have thought it? John, welcome to the Coaching Conversation.
Thanks, Graham. I appreciate it.
Our topic today is going to be how to negotiate your salary hard without risking the offer. And John, welcome. And please tell everybody how you became a salary coach.
That's a really good question. Thanks for asking. It was a long journey, actually. I started off my career as a recruiter working for a temporary service agency. I really wanted to be um, a financial analyst, and that's what I trained for in college. So I get out of college, I'm getting ready to start my first job as a financial analyst, and 2 weeks before I start, the company rescinds all the offers to everyone outstanding. And so I had a newborn son at the time, and I really needed to land a job. So I pulled out all the stops. I started networking like crazy, and I finally found this job as a recruiter for a temporary service agency. And I think so many people who are recruiters fall into it by accident, just like that. Most people don't go out looking for a recruiting job. They just sort of fall into it like I did. And I discovered after starting to do it that I was actually really good at it. But I was living on starvation wages, Graham. It was not comfortable at all. My first salary was $16,000 per year,
Wow.
and it was really hard to feed my young family on that. So I spent the next 5 years working for these agencies, starving to death. And I finally got an opportunity to be a corporate recruiter, a technical recruiter for a tech firm in Portland, Oregon. I worked there for 3.5 years and really enjoyed it. It was my dream job until their marketing department made a series of blunders. They introduced a whole new generation of products that were mismatched with the market. It was a absolute flop, and they decided to eliminate 5,000 jobs from the company.
Wow.
Now, when you're like me, a recruiter who's responsible for adding heads to the company, and they decide it's time to get smaller, usually you're one of the first to go. It's one of the dangers of being a recruiter is that you're kind of out there on the skinny branches. So my finances were finally starting to correct themselves. In fact, at that point, I had just bought my first home. It was a really exciting time in my life, and then I lose the job. And I was terrified at that point that the new house that I just bought is going to be repossessed. Maybe somebody's going to come looking after my 1971 Volkswagen Super Beetle that I drove. And I was really afraid, and the economy around the Portland, Oregon area at the time was not good at all. So I cast the resume to the four winds just to see where it would land. And I ended up getting an interview with Capital One Financial, the credit card company, in Richmond, Virginia, which is about as far away from Oregon as you can go and still be in the United States. But through that process, I started encountering people like me, other recruiters responding to my resume, and they were asking me all the scary questions. John, what's your salary requirement? John, what's the minimum that you'll take to move to Louisiana? Stuff like that. And I discovered just how unprepared I was to answer those questions, even though I was asking them every single day. So I get this interview with Capital One, and I go through an absolute hellish selection process with them. They had 23 different behavioral competencies they were assessing me on in interviews. And I found out later if I failed even one of those, I was not going to get an offer.
Wow.
They gave me three different psychometric tests. And if I failed the cut score on any one of those, I was not going to get an offer. And then they did a whiteboard exercise, like a business case interview, where you go up to the whiteboard and they give you some information. You have to do some live math without a calculator and reach some decisions that are supported by logic and analytics, and then defend your decision in front of a panel of people. If you fail that, you're not getting an offer from Capital One. So after all that's done, I'm sitting there in the interview room and I'm wiping the sweat off myself. And in comes Chip, the recruiter that I've been working with. And he sits down across from me and he says, John, I'm just going to level with you. I'm tired of working on this position. I've interviewed over 20 people for this job, and only two have passed the process. You're one of them, and the other guy just withdrew. So, what's going to take to get a yes out of you today? I want to tell the hiring manager moving to Richmond, Virginia.
Wow.
And the light bulb came on. Like I'd never have this much leverage just dropped in my lap before. And I really didn't know what to do with that. So I said, "Oh, okay. If you can give me $10,000 extra in salary, we can move the incentive up a little bit. You can give me a signing bonus, and let's talk about the relocation plan because I just bought a house and I'm worried about selling it." So I got all these concessions, and it happened really fast. They said yes to all these things really fast. And I was thrilled. I went home and I told my family, but then I spent the next 3 years at Capital One. Just, it was itching my brain. I couldn't get rid of it. I thought, I wonder if I just left a whole bunch of money on the table because they said yes really fast. And so after I got to Capital One, I actually started paying attention to how much money candidates were leaving on the table. I would, when it came time to hire somebody, there's an offer approval process that you usually go through. And instead of um, making an offer that was approved to a candidate, and then if there's a negotiation going back for a reapproval, I'd save time by getting a negotiating range pre-approved. So let's say I'm making an initial offer at 175, but I can go as high as 195. And then if I close at 180, I just save the company $15,000 in negotiation savings. So I started tracking how much I was saving, and I set a goal at Capital One to save my annual salary every month just with negotiation savings.
Wow.
And I hit that goal a lot. So I started realizing just how much money candidates were leaving on the table through that process. And then I started noticing the mistakes that candidates were making in the process that would limit their negotiating ability, and how I could push them around sometimes, and how they would signal their desperation to me sometimes. And after that, I started helping friends and family negotiate. Over the course of the next several years, I realized, I could help somebody get an extra 15 or $20,000 sometimes just by guiding them through this process that nobody knows how to operate. And so a few years ago, middle of the pandemic, I start thinking, I wonder if I could help people I don't know. And so I went out to LinkedIn and I said, I'm willing to help 10 salary job seekers for free. The only condition is that I don't know you and I want to see if I can help you. So I had 10 people come into that process. It was sort of a pilot in my mind. I wanted to see if this would work. It was the beginning of creating the salary coach method. And so out of those 10 people, every single one of them had a negotiation gain. Nobody lost their offer. I think the minimum one was somewhere around $10,000, and the high of that process was in the $50,000 range
Wow.
for
Wow.
gains. Um, so I realized at that point that I had a system and a process that could work for almost any salaried employee. But the higher up you are the closer you are to there only being one of you in an organization, the the greater the negotiating latitude is. So I discovered that I could help executives more than I could help mid-career people, but I could help them all. Some executives are leaving six figures on the table and they don't even know it. So that's just an exciting thing to think about and talk about. That's the same thing that itched me back at Capital One is probably itching your listeners right now. They might be wondering how much they left on the table last time they moved.
Yeah, the whole concept of a salary coach is unknown, I think. When we were planning to hold the session together, it was exactly that that caught my eye. It's not a profession, it's not a role that I've ever seen anywhere else. And I'm probably in my previous corporate life, all those years ago, I probably made all the mistakes that, that you've just talked about. So I get the prototype, the test bed with LinkedIn, but how did that turn into what is now what you do?
Yeah. Well, after that prototype, the test bed that you just mentioned, I started reaching out to job seekers, offering this service, and I went through a bunch of iterations, figuring out like how much I should charge for this, what would seem fair, and all that. So I tested all that too, and over the course of the last couple of years, have refined my methods. But to date, I've never had anybody lose an offer at the end. And I think what really excites people is the idea that they could negotiate their pay with minimal risk to the offer. And that's a cornerstone of what I do is removing or reducing the risk to almost zero. That's the thing that really holds people back. There are several things that hold people back from talking about pay. The top on the list is the fear of losing the offer at the finish line that you worked so hard to get. If
Yeah.
you find yourself thinking, I got an offer, this is good enough to say yes to, that's a giant red flag waving in your face saying you're about to leave a lot of money on the table. It's a signal that you're bargaining with yourself and saying the risk of negotiating is not worth what I think the reward's going to be. But if you could reduce the risk to almost nothing, would you poke at this offer a little bit to see what could be done?
So are your clients typically or exclusively candidates for new roles rather than people already in a position and looking to negotiate their existing remuneration?
I think that's great. I would say most all of them are job seekers in
Right.
one way, shape, or form. About one third of my clients are currently in a role and they've decided that it's time to make a change and they don't want to waste the opportunity. They want to maximize this financial opportunity of making a change. It's a little easier to work with those clients than with ones who have been found redundant or something like that, right? So if you're laid off or been made redundant, that's about two-thirds of my clients. When you're in that position, you automatically feel like you don't have leverage to ask for more. Um, you feel a little beat up actually.
Yeah.
Your self-confidence takes a hit, and so you're particularly vulnerable to taking that good enough offer when you're in that situation. And then a tiny fraction of my clients are people who are in a job and they want to approach their boss for a pay increase. So that happens only once in a while, and the reason why is that conversation is completely different than the job change conversation. The process that you have to go through is different. The language that you want to use is different. It's just apples and oranges. So I try to focus on the people that are making a job change from one company to another company. That's, I tell people that is the easiest raise you'll ever get, is moving from one company to another. Once you're inside a company, you're kind of enslaved to the HR process, the HR law of the company, whatever that is. They're going to have policies around, let's say we promote you one grade. How much can we give you for a one grade promotion? There's a limit there. It's a policy. It's going to be between like, say, 3 to 8% or something like this. When you move from one job to another, there's far fewer policies that govern
Yeah.
what they bring you in at.
So when you're working with a new client, are you coaching them, mentoring them in advance of their interviewing process, or do they come to you at the point where they think they are going to receive an offer or have received an
Mhm.
offer?
I'm really glad you asked that question, Graham, because some of my clients do come to me when they've received an offer and they say, John, I've received an offer. Help me to improve it. Or I received a lowball offer. I don't like it. What can be done to change this into what I want? And I can help people at that stage, but I can help you much more if we start earlier in the process. And the reason why people get lowball offers is because they've made mistakes earlier in the process that I could help them to avoid. Maybe they said something in the original phone interview that made the interviewer think, well, okay, I can get them at this level. Or during the interview process, they didn't prove their value in a strong way. And so I like to coach people through those early stages. It's because that's what sets the stage for a maximized offer at the end. So, anybody listening to this that might want me as a coach or might want to maximize their own offer, just be aware that negotiation is a process, not an event. It's the
Fabulous.
negotiation does
Yeah,
not start when you get an offer. You have to
it's a fabulous.
position.
I love that. It's a process, not an event. I love that.
Yeah.
So, John, when you're working with a client and they come to you early into their job seeking
Mm.
um, enterprise, typically, how long would you work with them?
That's a good question. So when I choose to work with someone, I'm in it to the finish line. So if their job search lasts for 8 months, then I'm going to be their coach for 8 months. I don't charge by the hour, so it's unlimited access to me until you land. Now, the average engagement for me is going to be anywhere from 4 or 5 hours with somebody up to maybe 25 hours with somebody over the course of the search. So right before a phone interview, we can have a coaching conversation and I can refresh what they're supposed to say in the phone interview and we can practice a little bit. And the same happens before a face to face interview. When they get an invitation, I spend some time with them preparing. Now, after a while, if we've done that 2 or 3 times, they understand now what they're supposed to do because they've learned the skills, the verbal process of what they're supposed to do. Now they know what the landmines are and they know how to not step on those. And so after a few times, we don't need to meet quite so often. They've learned the skills. The big time consuming engagement is once they get an offer. Now we're going to spend a lot of time together, very closely, talking about how we're going to maximize the offer that's now on the table safely without putting it at risk, assuming that they want that. They might have two offers. They want one more than the other.
Well, yeah, I can see how that would make you feel very confident. Yeah, I can
Yeah.
understand that bit. So, do you specialize in any particular profession or sector, any particular industry?
Um, that's a good question. I would say no, but some sectors and industries are easier than others. For example, in the United States, public employees or people who work for the government, those those jobs are very often tightly regulated in terms of the pay ranges. There's not a lot of bonus or incentive package that gets included. These are all negotiating fronts. Very often, there's not a signing bonus, for example, that could be included in some of these. The job pays what it pays, and it's very difficult to negotiate on those. So I would say I'm looking mostly to work with people who want to work in the private sector, and this could be um, publicly traded companies with stock ticker symbols or privately held companies. You've got leverage either way to ask for more. Most of my clients too are senior level people. Um, I'd say at least mid career and above. C-suite executives have the most to gain.
When you start to introduce these techniques or this awareness, if that's the right
Mhm.
description, do you find people go, ah, it was obvious? Or do they still need you all the way through to the end?
It's a mix of both. It's really a mix of both. Some of the key principles that I use are obvious once you know them. It's like, oh, that makes sense. Um, and once the light bulb goes on, it's an easy shift into that. Um, the Where they need me is in the nuance of the personalities that they're dealing with, or how to
Yeah.
bring their own personality into the conversation. One of the things I like to teach people is that you don't have to become someone you are not to negotiate your pay. And I think a lot of people think that and holds them back. Um, People think that in order to negotiate their pay, maybe they're going to have to become aggressive, or they're going to have to become brave, or they're going to have to learn to play a game of chicken, which most people don't like the idea of that because it sounds quite high risk. The answer is you don't have to be aggressive, and in fact, you shouldn't be.
No.
You need to be collaborative. And so, some of what I do is I teach people how to harness their own communication style to naturally engage in conversation about these things and reassure them that it's safe to do this. Um, my experience as a recruiter, I can tell them if you said that to me, wouldn't bother me one bit. In fact, I hear that from people 5 times a week. So don't think that you're taking some massive risk just by inviting them into a conversation.
I'm going to regret asking this question, I suspect. But we talked about your clients being primarily candidates and job seekers.
Yes.
Do you get recruiters talking to you and asking for your support and advice albeit from the other side of the
Yes.
desk?
This is interesting because some of my clients are actually senior level HR people, recruiters, even sales executives, people who negotiate for a living come to me. And the reason why they do that is because the stakes are completely different when it's your deal. Like
Right.
if you were a sales executive and you were closing multi-million-dollar deals for your company every day of the week, like negotiating is not a problem for you. You understand the mechanics and the principles, but the stakes are so different. It would be like the VP of sales coming into your office and saying, Graham, if you don't close this deal, you're fired. That's what a job offer negotiation feels like.
Right.
Because if you don't close the deal, it's off the table and it impacts your family. It impacts your ability to pay your rent, to pay your car note, all these things. The stakes are personal. And when those stakes become personal, the fear of loss just bubbles up in people. And so the techniques that you use to negotiate pay are different from standard negotiating techniques. Even if you're a recruiter like me and you're used to asking these questions, you may never have thought about it from the candidate's perspective. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
Very, very interesting. John, you're also an author. You wrote a book with the most fabulous title, Act Your Wage.
Yes, behind
Our
me there.
audience, they're going to be in love with this. They're going to be Googling this forever now, I think. How did the book come about? But why
A
did you feel you should do that?
couple of reasons. So, first of all, I can only coach a certain number of people. I am, I can become tapped out at times. I think I can only really coach 10 or 12 people before they start to run together in my head, at the same time. And I really wanted to help more people than that. So I decided that a book would be a good idea, to bring some of the basic principles, the core principles, the salary coach method to people at a much lower price point. I can help a lot more people this way. And I also built something called the Salary Coach Academy, which is a recorded, it's a series of recorded lessons, me
Right.
teaching on video how to get through every single step of the process safely with your skin still on. And those things don't include the nuance of me coaching you personally, but I wanted to help thousands of people and not just 5 or 10 at a time. And so I decided to write the book. And interestingly enough, when I put the book out for pre-order, um, which was about a year ago, it hit international bestseller on the first day of pre-order launch.
It doesn't surprise me.
And it should tell you something about how hungry people are for this kind of information. There's a lot of crummy information on how to negotiate pay, and this is something we all have to do. Why isn't this information available to everybody? I wish it was. So I wrote the book, and that's kind of how the book came into being.
Fantastic.
Since now I have a best-selling book, like it's opening up all kinds of doors, like being on this podcast.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I can understand that.
it's being an author helps me to get here.
Yeah,
So
yeah. But it's also, as you said before, it's a way of reaching people who otherwise you would never reach. So it
yep,
serves a purpose, a meaningful purpose in itself.
yes.
As we come to the end, John, is there one single tip that you would give any potential candidate, any potential job seeker when it comes to this particular aspect, negotiating the wage?
Absolutely. The question that terrifies people most, I think, early on in the process is what's your salary requirement? So I want to I'll give a brief example of how to answer that question and to keep your skin on and why it's wrong to give a number at that point. So there are a lot of ways people think they should answer this question. Somebody calls you on the phone and they say, Graham, you applied for this position. We love your resume. I'd like to have a conversation with you about your skills and experience. But first, can you tell me what your salary requirement is? This makes people nervous because they know that if they answer too low, they just left money on the table. And if they answer too high, maybe they'll get screened out and they will never get the chance to interview. But they think that they have to answer the question with a number because of the way it's phrased. So here's the secret sauce. Don't answer the question with a number, and also don't say my range is negotiable or let's wait on that until after I've interviewed and then we'll talk pay. That's an equally disastrous path, and I can explain why if you want me to. But instead of answering with a number, answer in a range. Now, the recruiter who's asking that question, or the HR person, or whoever's calling you on the phone, they're trying to discover if they can get you. That's the question in their head that they're trying to answer. They want to know if you're qualified, interested, and affordable. So that last bit, affordable, can I get Graham? Is Graham gettable or is he way out of our range? So as long as they believe that they could get you, they'll advance you to the interview. So let's say you would be tempted to say, well, my salary requirement is 175,000. That's what you would be tempted to say. Instead of saying that, you can say, well, I'm talking to a number of other companies. I'm in an active job search. And the range of pay that I'm discussing with them is between 170 and mid twos. It's a wide range, I realize, but most companies have different job scopes and different things that I would be responsible for in that. But that's the range that I'm discussing with other companies. How does that sit with you? And if there's overlap with their range and your range, you're probably going to pass through that stage gate. You haven't painted yourself into a corner by giving them a number at this point. So this is an important part of the salary coach method. You start off that conversation with a range, and then when you're interviewing, that's where you prove how much you're worth. So if you give them a high number in that phone screen, you have not yet proven what you're worth. It's too easy at this point because nobody in the hiring manager's team has fallen in love with you yet. Too easy to flush you out of the process right here. So, I mean, and if you said mid twos at that stage, you might get bounced right out.
Yeah.
But if you have a really strong interview, you might be able to work your value up in the hiring manager's mind to 240, depending on the complexity and the value of the problems you solve for them. So how does that sit with you, Graham?
John, it's perfectly understandable advice. I can see the value of it, and I can see how so many people, me included, would have made that mistake. I fully see the value of what you're saying, and it's tremendous to hear. John, we're coming to the end of this episode, and I just want to say it's been incredible, not only just to meet you, but there is someone out there who is a salary coach, who clearly knows what he's talking about and can clearly help. And that's been a revelation to me. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
There are going to be, I'm absolutely certain, from our audience, people who want to be helped by you, who want to know more. How can they find you?
So a couple of ways. Thank you for asking that, by the way. You can email me directly at john@salary.coach. That's probably the fastest way to start a conversation with me. But if you want to check out the Salary Coach Academy, it's there as well, and that's salarycoachacademy.com.
John, thank you. So that's it this week, everybody. John, the salary coach, and I hope you found it useful, hope you found it interesting, and we'll see you again soon. Bye. So there you have it, the latest edition of the Coaching Conversation. Hope you enjoyed it, hope you found it useful, and I hope it did what it set out to do. As promised at the beginning of the programme, here is a special offer for you, our loyal audience. If you reach out to me at gwiley@sagegreen.com and mention this podcast, we'll make available to you a coaching program for you and or your team at a 50% discount. So where can you reach us? So it's definitely gwiley@sagegreen.com. You can also reach us at the Executive Mindset at sagegreen.com, and our website is clearly theexecutivemindset.co.uk. If you enjoyed this, do please leave us with a wonderful rating on Google. We'd really appreciate that. So nothing more for me to say now other than see you again soon.